Alright, so in today's video I'm going to show you how to replace a torsion spring on a residential door. Now, as you can see, this is not a full-size door. I'll show you here. That's all the bigger the door is. It's not a full-size door, but the procedure will be the same for a full-size door. You might have two springs. In that case, there will just be a couple extra steps, but it'll be the same steps. As a single spring, you'll just have to do it twice. Before I get started, quick disclaimer, don't do this if you don't know what you're doing or you don't have the right tools or whatever. If you think you're going to get hurt or you don't know how to do something, whatever, just don't do it, because you can get yourself hurt pretty easily when you're working on springs. So, first I'm going to go over, let me change the camera here real quick. First I'm going to go over the tools you're going to need for this. First thing, you want a proper set of winding bars. This is the most important part. You got to have winding bars. They can't be hollow. Don't use screwdrivers for it, because that's how you get yourself hurt, if you got proper winding bars. A pair of vice grips. You're going to want these to, when you wind the new spring, this is what you're going to use to keep the cables from going slack when you tighten the spring. A 9/16 wrench. You could use an impact gun too, although I find I don't have quite enough space to use one. But 9/16 wrench for removing the spring from the center bracket. A 3/8 inch wrench for tightening and loosening the set screws on the spring and the drums. And if you have one, you might need a hammer. That might come in handy. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to disconnect the garage door opener. That way it doesn't get in your way. So you're just going to take your emergency release, pull down on it, and then you've got, let me kind of adjust this here and zoom in. You've got that little connection that's holding the arm of the door. Got this little ring. Just undo this ring, pull out this pin, and then just slide the arm back toward the garage door. And that way you don't have any opener hooked up to your door anymore, so that way it doesn't get in the way. Alright, so now we're going to get into unwinding the spring, which this is one of the parts that you're going to want to be real careful on what you're doing. So I'm going to try not to get in the way of the camera too much. Hopefully I'm not going to get in the way, but well, I got to push my door down a little bit. But what you want to do, pretty much what you're going to want to start off by doing, well, if you have a single spring door and the spring is broken, you can skip this step, because the spring's broken, you don't need to unwind it. But if you have two springs, you're going to have to unwind the spring that's not broken. So the first thing it's always a good idea before you unwind it to test to see how much tension you're going to be up against. So, assuming you can see, yeah. So you've got these cables here on each side that go down to the bottom and lift up your door. What you're going to do to know how much force there is behind the spring is you're just going to pull. Basically, if you're winding the spring, you're pushing up on it on a standard headroom door. You're just going to wind the spring up a little bit until you see the cable slack, and just hold it for a little bit. That's going to give you an idea on how much force you're going to be holding. Once you do that, by the way, if you ever need to stop winding the spring, you can rest it against the top of the door right here, and that will hold it. So next you're going to take your 3/8 inch wrench, and you're going to loosen. There's two set screws you can't see. There's one up here, but you can't see it. You're just going to loosen both of those set screws. And then you're going to unwind your spring. So just unwind. Just loosen them up like so. And it's okay when you're unwinding the spring if the cables go slack. That's not a problem. Alright, now you've got the set screws undone. again, when you're unwinding the spring, you want to be really careful. Every time, you got to always make sure that you've got one winding bar in one of these holes. And if the winding bar is not resting on the door, you always got to be holding one of the winding bars. So make sure you put the winding bar in on all the way. To unwind it, you've got one against the door. Just push up a little bit so you can take that one out. Then unwind it. And you're just going to do that until the spring is completely unwound. And it'll be pretty easy to tell when it's fully unwound because you won't feel any tension anymore. Alright. So now our spring is fully unwound. Our next step is going to be, we're going to loosen up the cable drums. So, you've got, again, 2 set screws on these. Again, I apologize for blocking. I'm just going to loosen those up. And then you should be able to just pop the cable right off the drum. You can just leave the cables hanging there. And now you should be able to the drum should be able to just slide back and forth. Now again, we've got on the other side exactly the same thing. This one I've got to get the screws out here because I don't have very much space between this end of the spring and this drum, so it is a little bit difficult how tight it is here. Hold on, I'll get this cable out here first. There we go. And we can just kind of still in the slot, that's why. Alright, well, again, you're just going to loosen the set screws on the drum. And this is the 3/8 inch wrench, by the way, if I didn't already mention that. So now this is where the 9/16 is going to be used. You've got 2 bolts that hold the spring in place. So you're going to loosen those up. These are the bolts that actually hold the spring onto the center bracket. Once you get them loosened, you should be able to just do it the rest of the way by hand. And put those somewhere that you're not going to lose them. Alright. Once you do that, the spring should be free completely. You've got inside of the spring, I can take it out. Well, inside the spring, there's a plastic bearing. There you go. This plastic bearing here. This basically supports the shaft wherever the center bracket is. So wherever you have one of these brackets, you should have one of these plastic bearings. And if you don't have one of those, I would suggest that you do get one. Alright, next step is going to be to remove the spring line. So, if I take it back over here, since this is where I have the most clearance, this is where I'm going to do it. Basically, slide this back a little bit. The tube goes through these bearings right here. So you're just going to want to slide out. Slide this tube out of that bearing. Bear with me because this can be a little bit tricky to do. By the way, don't be afraid to get your hands greasy when you're doing this, because you definitely will be doing this. This is where the tube might be a little bit. I might have to try it the other way. Let me try it from the other side here. No, it's not going to be any easier. Alright, well let me put this on pause. Make this a little bit more loose here. Alright, so I got that. So now you're just going to slide out the tube here. You're going to slide the drum off the tube. Just set that aside. This part, it's back in here. You're going to slide the spring itself off the tube. So, just so you've got your spring off. So, and if you have a door with 2 springs, what you're going to do then at this point, you're going to slide back in here. Bring it closer up there. You're going to slide the tube out from this side, take off this drum, slide the spring out from this side. And it's the same, you're putting the springs back on pretty much. So, again, make sure you have this plastic bearing on there. And now we're just going to go ahead and reinstall the spring. Well, the new spring, even though I'm going to put the same spring back on. So, you want to pay attention to which side the spring is going to go on. You'll notice your cable drums will have some paint on them. This one is black, and the other one, there we go. See, the other one is red. Now, this spring, get in the camera here because I don't know what I'm showing. You see, the spring's got a little bit of black paint on it. You're going to put that on the same side as this black drum. So, the winding end on the spring is going to point towards the cable drum. And when you put the spring on, basically, you want the spring to wind. I can't really get this a good angle for you. You basically want to wind the spring up. You want the end of the coil on the winding end to be pointing up. So I'm going to go ahead and reinstall the spring. So, slide the tube out. Slide the spring out. Just gotta force it a little bit because there is just that little small hole on the spring. Again, I apologize if I'm blocking the camera. There we go. Get through. Take your drum, put it back on. Come on. There we go. Put it back on. Put it back into the bearing like that. Your drum, you want the set screws to be facing in towards the middle of the door. And then again, if you have a second spring, just do that again on the opposite side. So now we're going to, and again, I apologize if I was blocking that there. Now we're going to reattach the spring to that center bearing. Now again, like I said before, this plastic bearing has got a little raised spot on it. That's what goes inside of the bearing. And the spring, the spring you're going to lift onto the bearing just like so. And the center bracket is slotted, so you are able to make some adjustment depending on how far out the spring is. And so you're going to take your nuts and bolts and you're going to attach the spring. You can use an impact gun for this, but like I said, there's not very much space here, so my impact gun won't fit. Just start by, and if you might have to rotate it slightly to get the bolts lined up right. Just start by threading them by hand, and then you can take it out on the right way. Yes. And you can fully tighten them down. Second wrench to hold it in place, shouldn't I? Let's see if I can get this size. Yeah, I'm going to use an adjustable wrench for this because I don't happen to have two 9/16 wrenches. That should be good. There we go. So get those real nice and tight. Same for the other one. Get it nice and tight. Don't want this thing to come loose. That would be a bad day for you. Oops. There you go. Alright. Now you've got that back on, we're ready to set our cables. So, start with one side. I'm going to start with this side because I have less room here. What you're going to do, well, in my case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually tighten these set screws first and then put the cable on because, again, I don't have very much space between here, so if I have the cable on, it won't be very easy to get at the set screws. So you're just going to start by hand tightening the set screws. Just do it until you feel them touch the shaft. By the way, you want these drums right up against the bearing plates. And then you're going to take your 3/8 inch wrench and you're going to tighten them a half turn after it touches the shaft. Same for the other one. Once it touches the shaft, which is right there, we're going to give it, that's a quarter turn, that's a half turn. You don't need to go overkill with these. There's some people that think, well, it's under a lot of tension, got to tighten it a lot. No, you just need a half turn. Now we're going to set the cables. So you've got this little slot right here. Now if I take my cable, sorry that you can't see, I'm just trying to get the cable. Alright, so you want to take this cable. The cable wraps around the drum like this, and then this end is going to stick into there, just like so. And then you're going to hand tighten this, or, well, you're going to turn the drum, as I guess I can sit you back down now. This is where your vice grips are going to come in. You're going to turn turn your drum as tight as you can with your hands, and then you're going to take the vice grips and vice grip the shaft, and I'll show you how you do that here. Make sure you don't need a ton of tension on the cable, just get it as tight as you can with your hand, and then vice grip the shaft. You want it against the wall because you're going to wind the spring this way, and if you wind the spring without the shaft, it's going to turn this, and the cables are going to come off the drums because it's going to turn this way, it's going to turn up this way, and it's going to make the cables slack and then eventually come off. Now that you have that, the other side, you're going to have to set the cable first. You're going to have to set the cable before you tighten it. So again, you're going to loop it around the slot. Loop it around the slot. Insert the cable. Tighten it as much as you can with your hands. I don't remember where I put my wrench. There it is. Tighten it as much as you can with your hands. You want to have about the same amount of cable tension on both sides. And then you're just going to go through this again. Tighten the set screws till you feel them touch the shaft. And then give them another half turn. Just need slightly more, but on a half turn, don't go overkill. Now this one touched the shaft, so it's a quarter turn, and there's a half turn. So now your cables are set. They should both have about the same amount of tension on them. If they're slightly off, you'll be okay. All right, now comes the part where you're going to wind the spring. So you want to keep track of how many quarter turns you're doing. Basically, you're going to want to do about as many quarter turns as how many feet tall the door is. My door is 3.5 feet tall. I'm going to put 3.5 turns on this spring. You might need a little different. Every door needs a little bit different turns. So start with how many turns start with as many turns for how many feet tall the door is, and if you need to make adjustments after that, you can make small adjustments. So make sure these set screws are loose, that they aren't touching the shaft. And now you're just going to go ahead and wind your spring. So again, you want to be really careful when you do this. So you're going to start, that's a quarter turn, that's a half turn, 3/4, and that's one full turn. Again, if you need to stop winding, put in winding bar, let it rest against the door like so. So we've got one turn. Oh, you couldn't see anything on what I was doing there, sorry. One full turn. So here, actually, don't do this at home, by the way. Do not let the spring unwind by itself like that. Do not do that. That's how you get yourself hurt. I just had one turn, so. Alright. So again, make sure your spring can spin freely. Quarter turn, half turn, 3/4 of a turn, and that's one full turn. If you need to stop winding, just let it rest against the door. You will have a paint line. This is how you can keep track of how many turns. See, one line. That means one turn. So we're going to go back to our spring. We have got one full turn. You got to keep track. You don't want to forget how many turns you got, because then you'll have to start all over. Quarter turn, half turn, 3/4 turn. That's two full turns. Quarter, half, 3/4. That's 3 full turns. And remember, my door is 3.5 feet tall, so I'm going to start with 3.5 turns. We're going to give it 2 more quarter turns. And then just let it sit. So now our spring is fully tightened. Now comes the part that you're going to stretch the spring. So that way you'll put a gap in these coils. So you're going to take your winding bars, and if you have a hammer, you might want to use this. It'll be a little bit easier. You just tap it a few times to stretch the spring. Now you're going to need your 3/8 inch wrench to tighten the set screws. Going to wait till it touches the shaft and then give it again another half turn. Same deal with the other one. When you do that, after you do that, don't just rip your winding bar out. Put in the second one, take the first one off of the door, and then slowly just kind of raise the door like that. Alright. So now our spring is wound. Now it's got all the tension on it. Now you're going to test the balance of your door. Actually, first, take the vice grips off your shaft. And then, zoom out here. You're just going to raise your door. Make sure it stays halfway. Which, this one doesn't want to stay fully open. Which, I guess I must have not put enough turns on it. So, I'm going to add another quarter turn. When you're adding tension to your spring, you only want to do a quarter turn at a time. You want to make small adjustments because then you can end up with your spring overbalanced. Loosen your set screws. Keep one bar in the spring at all times. I'm gonna add, oops, yeah, that's what you, okay, well here's a little lesson for you. Sorry I didn't film that. Here's why you vice grip your shaft. I accidentally forgot to. This is what'll happen. Your cables will come off. So, oops, that was my bad. There you go, lesson on what not to do. So, yeah, I apologize that I keep forgetting to point the camera back on, but you get the idea. Pull your cables as tight as you can. It's hard to do. Vice grips on the shaft. Alright, now we're going to add there you go. Add a quarter turn. Stretch the spring a little bit. Just give it a little more. Tighten your set screws until they touch the shaft, and give it another half turn. Again, same deal as last time. Put your second winding bar in. Let it just raise up a little bit. Make sure you don't have any more tension on your winding bar, so now the tension's all on your shaft. Same deal. Lift it halfway. Our door stays. You lift it fully open. Now it is staying. So this is about how far above the track you want your door to stay, and you do want it to be able to stay at the halfway point. So now at this point, you can take your arm, reconnect it to your operator at the door bracket, test it out. You might need to do some adjustments to the opener after a new spring, but that is how you replace a torsion spring. And again, for the markings, this is how you can know how many turns you have in your spring. With these little lines, you've got 1, 2, 3, and a little more. 3.5 turns. So, thank you guys for watching. Let me know if you have any questions, and we'll see you in the next one.